I believe I have introduced Ms. Cathy Wurzer, as well as Dr. Professor Bruce Kramer. We're going to begin this afternoon's program with music from the Choral Arts Ensemble, and the piece they're going to begin with is Hark, I Hear the Harp Eternal. Thank you all so very much for joining us today.
Hark, I hear the harps eternal ringing on the farther shore, as I near those swollen waters with their deep and solemn roar. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. And my soul sing with sorrow, fading as the light of day passes swiftly o'er the waters to the sea far away. Hallelujah, 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 I am. Souls have crossed before me safely to that land of perfect rest, and I hear them singing faintly in the mansions of the blest. Hallelujah,
Choral Arts Ensemble, excellent. It's so nice to actually be in a room where I can see my audience. Doesn't happen often. I sit in small rooms in the dark or I'm in front of a TV camera, so it's actually nice to get to see everybody. Thank you for being here, Bruce. It's good
Great to
see
be
you.
here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You know, I never thought we'd ever be on this stage together.
No, me either.
I bet not. I have to make a confession, actually. I never thought I'd ever travel this road with anybody like you before. We came up with this idea to follow Bruce on his journey with ALS, and we had a meeting. This was almost 2 years ago now. We had a meeting about it, and I remember thinking to myself, well, good idea, but after the meeting, I thought, I don't know if I'm able to walk this journey with you.
And why was that?
You know, I wrote about it in my journal. Can I read you a little bit of the journal? That's okay. This is a little personal here, but after the meeting we had, went back home, and again was thinking to myself, I can see why people are thinking this is going to be really good radio, and I wrote, I just don't know if I have the emotional and psychic strength to immerse myself in this man's life. I think Bruce and Ev are terrific, but do I have what it takes to publicly chronicle his last few years of life? There are so many other infinitely talented people who could. I don't want to screw this up. If I were to really pick at my scabs, I guess I also don't want to be vulnerable. This is so deep and potentially raw, and I'm already swimming in similar waters with Dad. My dad, by the way, has dementia and also has a cancerous tumor in his spleen. So right when you and I were talking along with Ev, I had all this other stuff happening. I thought, I just don't know if I'm the woman to go down this road with you. What did you think?
I think Ev and I went home that day, and we both said, well, what do you think? And of course, we were trying to decide, could we trust you? Could we trust you to be, to tell the truth? about what was going to happen and to be sensitive to it. And also to allow this voice, this story to go where it goes, because we, of course, I've never had ALS before, and I didn't really know where it was going to go. But we were game, you were game, and here we are.
Well, I thought about it for a couple of days, and then I got a cosmic ping, almost like a cosmic email, that little ping that you get when you get an email. And I thought, well, there must be a reason that this opportunity presented itself, that I bet Bruce has something to teach me. And maybe I need to learn from him. And maybe I am the perfect person to do this. And I thought, well, you know what, just stop, get beyond the fear-based rattling around in my head and just leap in, and so here we are.
Here we are.
Here we are. So thank you for being with us on this little part of our journey. How long have you been living with ALS?
I was diagnosed on December 6th, 2010, a day that lives in infamy in my life. I think I recognized a couple of my brethren in ALS out there. I'm sure you remember the day that you were diagnosed as well. It didn't go well. It was a very traumatic experience. The neurologist couldn't wait to get us out the door. Was very happy to get us away from him and turn us over to somebody else, and we weren't quite sure where we were going at that point. So it was a tough 6 weeks.
Can I play a bit of tape?
Yeah.
This is the first time that Minnesota Public Radio's listeners met Bruce Kramer in December of 2011. This is a short clip from that very first piece where he talked about the diagnosis, and we caught up with Bruce at the time as he was working with one of his choirs. So if you could roll that would be terrific.
Pretty good. Basses, we missed that G on the word come. Let's start at and I am thine, just with the basses. And I, ready, one, and sing. And
On this late July day, Bruce is working the Good Samaritan United Methodist Church Choir through an anthem he arranged. He used to direct the choir until he became too busy a couple of years ago as a dean at the University of St. Thomas.
I was just always looking for things to do, and so I didn't sleep a lot. I exercised a lot. I was bike commuting. I was in excellent shape, a lot of energy, and just really loved my life.
Until Kramer started noticing odd physical problems. He told his doctor during a routine physical in August of 2010 that
My foot feels kind of funny. When I walk, it flops. And so she had me walk for her, and she said, well, I think maybe you ought to go see a neurologist. It's probably nothing. And so I blew that off for 2 months, but I fell.
twice. Each time he fell, Kramer struggled to get up. After a battery of tests in December of 2010, it only took a neurologist in a 15-minute office visit to give Bruce and his wife the devastating diagnosis, ALS, an incurable degenerative neurological disease.
It just felt like he could hardly wait to get us out of there. And my wife, when we went out to the car, she muttered a number of expletives and said something about they couldn't even give us a pamphlet.
But remember the date, don't you?
December 6th, 8:15 in the morning.
And your life changed.
Yeah. We went home, and we kind of retreated to different parts of the house. I went up and got on the internet and started doing research. She was just sitting and staring out the window. I just couldn't believe what I had facing me. And then, there's the big thing, of course, is, well, what do I do now?
What you started to do was to blog, and that's actually how I found out about you, this exquisitely written blog, the Dis-Ease Diary. Why did you put yourself out there so publicly, even before I met you?
Yeah. I've never told you this, so I'm going to tell you something I've never told you. I actually went to a counselor a couple of times after I'd been diagnosed. And the second time I went to her, she said, with what's coming, you're going to have to really learn to separate your head and your thoughts and your feelings from your body. And I looked at her and I said, I just can't do that. That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. My body is going to be there. My body is going to be my body. And I have to have a way to deal with this. So I had been keeping a journal, much like you're keeping a journal, and mine's pretty raw too. And then I thought, well, there are a lot of people that want to know what's going on, how are you doing? And I don't have a lot of energy, so I'll blog. And I realized the blog became kind of therapy because I didn't really find a therapist who knew how to handle me. And that's why I started.
Let's introduce the concept of dis-ease, because you were very clear, Bruce Kramer, in that first interview, and very mindful about the word not disease, but dis-ease. What does that mean?
Yeah, at the time, I thought what I meant was that all of us have something in our lives that is a dis-ease, that disses the ease of our lives, if you will. But what I've come to realize in this last 2 years is that this is just the human condition. And it's really a question of how awake are we to our own dis-ease. And in that awakening, are we willing to become vulnerable to it? And really, are we willing to allow it to push us around a little bit so that we can grow from it? And so the idea at first was, you have a marriage blowing up, that's dis-ease. You've got cancer, that's dis-ease. You're worried about your kids, that's dis-ease. But now I see it much differently. It's almost a presence. It's almost a persona in my life.
But in others too, but they just don't know it?
I think that I would almost look at this whole experience of ALS as being an awakening, if you want it to be. But it's really choosing to go that way.
You mentioned the blog allows you to kind of get yourself out there. It allowed you, of course, to tell people, which leads me to this next little bit of tape. Did you find that while this is about you, obviously, you're the one with ALS, it's also about other people too? Clearly your family, but your friends, your colleagues, and others who have to adjust and process this in their own way. Would that be correct?
That would be correct, yes. The whole idea that this was about me was exploded within 2 days. You tell your kids something like this and watch them just melt. And or you tell your family. We really were very careful about how we were telling people because at the time I wasn't sure how long I would be able to work, and I wasn't sure how I was going to handle it with work. And I was in a very public position. So it becomes not just about you, but it becomes about how does ALS or other types of things like that splash up on other people, and particularly the people that you love. So I think probably I don't want to step on the tape here, so I'll let you go to that.
It's from a blog called The Tell.
The Tell.
And The Tell, if you can get on the internet here later this afternoon, I want you to read the whole blog entry called The Tell, because it's very interesting. This is a clip of tape from the series, and it is Bruce talking about The Tell.
What I came to realize very quickly by the second day after my diagnosis was that even though I knew it was true, others had to deny. I remember talking to my brother, and his very first reaction was, "You can fight this. You can beat this. I know you. I know who you are, and don't give up on me. You can do this." And I was sitting there thinking to myself, if I thought I had a bat's chance, I would. I would do anything I could, and I will. But I don't think I'm going to beat this. It's really going to be about how I handle it. I need to hear his denial, and his anger. And we talked a couple of days later, and he had moved to another space. But it made me realize that this process is not about me. I think that when we see people who have disability, it's really uncomfortable for us. And it's not a pleasant thing, and it's not something that we want to I just want to hang around people who are dying. Most of us don't want to do that. So The Tell became more about me having to muster the energy to remain engaged with where you are.
That's a lot of work.
It was a lot of work.
Kramer says he had to decide what to say when people asked about his health, especially when he was using a cane. If someone asked if he had injured a leg, he had to make a quick mental calculation. Did he say yes? Or tell them instead he has ALS and watch the shock, disbelief, or embarrassment on the part of the person asking? He says that's the point of the tell. He feels disease is a shared experience even if only one person has it. Kramer says telling someone he has ALS means that they have been brought into his reality, if only for a moment.
I go back to my brother. He was the one that actually helped me focus this, because he said, you can fight this. And I realized that if I were fighting with this, it would be fighting with myself. This has become a part of me. This is who I am now. It doesn't define me. And that's the piece that's really hard, I think, for humans. We tend to look at people, we don't put them person first. I think I was just as guilty of that. So we don't say a person with disability, we say a disabled person. Well, if you define a person that way, then their disability comes first, and their personhood is an afterthought. And that piece of all of this, that sense that we're all temporarily able-bodied, we're all facing some form of disability in some way, shape, or form in our lives.
We just don't know it
We
yet.
just don't know it, or we do know it, and we probably carry a fear that it defines us. So then I started thinking to myself, well, probably the greatest thing that I have learned that I could give back is that it doesn't have to define us. We are who we are. And then we are who we are with the condition that we have. So rather than fighting it, own it. It's just a part of you.
Rather than fighting it, own it. It's just a part of you. But you've lost so much. I mean, obviously, you've lost physical capability, the loss of dreams, loss of control, loss of a certain identity. I say that because, hey, you were the Dean of the College of Education at St. Thomas. You were a triathlete. So have it to just be a part of you sounds, it's hard to get your head wrapped around that.
It really is. And you can live in that spot. It's very easy to live in what you've lost. And there are days when I do. But I learned very early on in this that if I lived in the loss, there was a lot of grief in that. And if I lived in the future, there was a lot of fear in that. Because I don't know exactly how this comes down, except it does. And so then the question is, well, where do you live? Well, you live here. This is where you live. And when I see my kids, they're my kids. And when you and I talk, we talk. And so it's finding that space and finding the energy to hold the past at bay and keep the future just a little distant in order to keep going.
Got to ask you about the bringing the tell. I thought was just a brilliant piece of writing. Bringing people into your reality, if only for a moment. Do you find some people kicking and screaming and not really want to get down in there with you?
All the time. First of all, the question is, with ALS, the question is, what do you tell them? Because I don't know if many of you have noticed, but a lot of people don't know who Lou Gehrig was. So you say Lou Gehrig's disease, and they go, oh, yeah, okay. And so, Lou Gehrig, and if you say ALS, it's an orphan disease. It's not something that, there aren't a lot of us in the United States with ALS. So it's hard to tell people even what that's all about.
I heard a wonderful speech last year by a man who has Alzheimer's disease, and he talked about the grace of diminishment. He was a fabulous speaker. When he lost his place, he'd just say, hey, it's part of what I have going on here, so I'm not going to worry about it. But he talked about the grace of diminishment. And I'm curious, he felt that there was grace even in his declining mental diminishment in his capacities and his capabilities. And he said he felt that these were wake-up calls to living his life finally and the shortness of life. So, I hate to ask you this in this manner, has there been grace in your diminishment to a degree?
Yes, of course. Not of course. I feel like I have been graced. I've been graced with what I call the gifts of ALS. And a lot of that has to do with, again, being able to hold yourself in the present, to hold yourself in this moment, to recognize that the colors are really bright at this place, the sounds are beautiful, the choir is gorgeous. Thank you very much. That if you can stay there, there is grace. But can I just read something to you? I knew you were going to ask me this. So this is about a year and a half ago, I wrote in my blog, "Some of you have said to me that you're impressed with my grace in this process. I thank you for the observation, but make no mistake about it, I'm pissed." So, and thank you for that, but it's complex. It's this space that we are given with dis-ease is a very complex space. It's a good place to be. It's an awful place to be. And you have to continually negotiate it. And so, yes, there's grace, but there's anger. And I think sometimes you just have to be angry enough to accept the grace that's there.
I understand. I want to ask about the deepening of love and relationships with ALS. You told me once, and it has not been on the air, I wrote it down because I liked what you said. You have felt that your heart has cracked open. Your heart has cracked open. And I said, gosh, what does that mean? Does that mean that you've been a kind of a closed individual all your life, or what has happened?
I've always been an open person in terms of my emotion, and particularly expressed with my choral music. Not as much as a college administrator. You can't afford to get too emotional in that kind of a job, or else they'll eat you for lunch. But it wasn't like you would leave a meeting with somebody and you'd say to them, I just want you to know how much you really mean to me, how much it means to me that you would take the time to spend this time with me. And that was what just opened up for me. I started thinking, well, if you don't tell them now, when are you going to tell them? If you don't tell the people you work with how much you love them, how much you care for them, when are you going to tell them? And so, yes, my heart cracked open, and now with some of the things that I try to do just to control the physical and emotional, particularly the adaptive yoga that I've been doing, we start with opening our hearts, with just a physical activity that we call opening our hearts. It's a beautiful metaphor for where I am.
The adaptive yoga class that I had a privilege of taking with Bruce one Monday evening will be part of the next piece that you'll hear in the NPR series. It's really something, truly it is. You mentioned choir, and I'm going to bring the choir up here in just a couple of minutes. I have one final question in this first part of what we're talking about here. Vulnerability. I admitted to I was going to have to be vulnerable here, walking this path with you. And you have just written a blog about being a vulnerable adult. Specifically, you said, vulnerable is a term I never thought to apply to myself. It drips of a non-existent control, of total dependency, of an old normal me rearing up and crying, not me ever. And then you write, without vulnerability, ALS would immediately kill me instead of escorting me home to eternity. What have you learned about vulnerability?
I have learned that it is, we all are vulnerable. I feel like what ALS has done to me, kind of grabbed me by the scruff of the neck and shaken me a little bit and said, pay attention, stupid. But it has caused me to become more human. We're vulnerable. We live in this very vulnerable or this very important way of looking at the world, that vulnerability is going to always be a part of our existence. we deny it. We pretend like it's not there. And we have to some extent, or we'd never get in our cars and go anywhere. But we are vulnerable. And by embracing the vulnerability, what I found is that it also opens me up to handling this, to handling the next paper cut that is going to take the next thing. And so I've learned that I just have to live in the vulnerability.